Hey folks, welcome to Code and Concrete, where we share the latest trends and the stories of trailblazers in the built environment. We hope you gain some insight from our wide range of topics such as real estate development and sustainability, or blockchain, artificial intelligence, and data. Joining us today is Dr. Dennis Hill. He's a semi-retired serial entrepreneur in information security, including blockchain and advanced apps involving artificial intelligence. He's a fractional CXO, tech, Tamer, change Catalyzer, and currently the chairman/president/CEO of the International Association for Human Resource Information Management. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate this forum. You have probably a very eclectic but very aware audience that I'm very excited to not only address, but I'd love to hear from in the future.
Well, we appreciate that. And we're going to enable that because at the end of the show, we'll talk about all the different ways that people can connect with you. And I think this is the perfect place to start, how you and I got connected, because I had reached out on LinkedIn just before I was hosting an event talking about real estate, blockchain, AI, data, things that you are certainly an expert in. And we found a good spot for you on the blockchain panel. And I mean, that was a blast. You had really good insights when it comes to blockchain. I mean, how many, not to say that this is an age question, but how many decades in the making is your blockchain and AI and data knowledge?
Oh, wow. Okay. So thank you. It is going to be, it's going to be a little age defining. So, AI goes way back to the days of when we used to refer to, systems as expert systems, where we would actually focus on knowledge impartation. And that goes back to the 80s. Prior to that, of course, my work in computer security dealt with a lot of cryptography. And cryptography, of course, is the basis of what we do in blockchain. So technically, that goes all the way back to the late 70s. So with that in mind, I've evolved my knowledge as the fields themselves have evolved over the last 4 decades. And I have absolutely loved every minute of it, to the extent that I like to see products, right? I like to see practical commercial applications of technology. So when people, want to have a glass of wine with me at a wine bar someplace and talk tech, we'll start off with, let's discuss Alan Turing's paper from 1936, and we'll go from there. And if their eyes glaze over, I know that they don't really appreciate how new a field all of this really is. And so when we talk about knowledge in this space, it is ever evolving, ever changing. We think it's being additive when in fact it's mostly derivative. And a lot of this stuff goes back not even quite 100 years from concepts. So today's blockchain will lead into other new exciting areas, quantum computing, certainly the evolution of AI into AGI and what that all means. People are not prepared for this convergence because it involves the convergence of such new technologies in terms of commercial application. Whereas when we had the last convergence, and people might not be able to put their finger on that very easily, but that's only in the last couple of decades when you were now able, and mostly in the last 12, 15 years, you're able to put audio, video, text, and everything on your phone, right? This was the convergence of the last period. And as we emerge now from the computer age into the knowledge age, we're no longer talking necessarily the technology, but the applications of the technology, the implications of the technology, and then the social impact of the technology. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not discussing that. I think that's sad. But maybe podcasts like this get people thinking a little broader, right?
Well, these are all things that I will let us open as Pandora's box, different topics that we can cover. And it is podcasts like this that will highlight that. And it's folks like you that will raise attention to that. However, before we jump down the rabbit hole, let's talk about how you got here. So if I recall correctly, you went to the Milwaukee School of Engineering. Is that right?
No, I attended Marquette.
You attended Marquette? Okay.
Yeah, I actually attended Marquette University in their biomedical engineering program. which was a holistic engineering program. What was really nice about it is that it involved aspects of both electrical and computer and mechanical engineering. And so that appealed to me, believe it or not, as a pre-med program. And so at the time, there were only 2 in the country. The one at Marquette was 4 years. The one at Case Western Reserve was 5. And frankly, it didn't take much number crunching to determine that an extra year of college for an undergraduate degree, especially if I was going to go to graduate school, was probably not an economically wise choice. So it was also a frontier field. And I loved doing things that I always have loved doing things out of the box and on that pioneering level. So I went to Marquette, became a research engineer while attending graduate school at General Electric Medical Systems at the time. And through those connections in the field, in the actual manufacturing and research field, we were working on things like the very first MRI system. We built it literally in a garage out on the county grounds, which we politely referred to as the biophysics lab, but it was a garage. And I think there's an athletic club on that site now. But it did seem like a turn of the century wooden structure. And we had a big, half Tesla magnet in there, electromagnet, and we started pioneering that work. Ultimately connected as a computer guy would be, and as I was, into all sorts of different demands around the area, whether it was the Medical College of Wisconsin or the research service at the VA. Ultimately, I became networked with a lot of academics and researchers in the area, and some suggested that I apply for a part-time teaching job at this school downtown called MSOE, Milwaukee School of Engineering. Honestly, having been here for 4 years or 5 years at that point, not knowing the difference between an MSOE and an MATC, they were just 4-letter references. I didn't know the difference. Did a little research on it, went down, interviewed, and the dean of research said, "We don't want you as a part-time teacher. We want you to head up a new program called Computer Science and Engineering."
Wow.
So at 23, I became the youngest professor and department head of a computer engineering program in the country, actually any engineering program, and literally had to create all the courses from scratch, including a course at the junior level in artificial intelligence and expert systems, and a senior level course in my bailiwick of research, which is computer security. So that was my start. And I continued to consult for GE, for the research service at the VA, for different faculty at the medical college and so forth, and continued my graduate work at Marquette in high frequency and optical electronics, what we would call microwaves today, and ultimately in computer science engineering as a hybrid program of study. So that really took me out of what I would call corporate America, put me into the more cavalier environment of academics and research. And of course, not having any experience doing any of this stuff before in my life, I didn't know what I shouldn't do. So I just went crazy and did what I thought was right, which was raise money to build labs, develop a curriculum that was eventually accredited in '87, and find jobs for these kids that were coming out with this really newfangled knowledge of both hardware and software, which was a distinction of our program. And today I'm very proud to count thousands of graduates from that program, including some real name-dropping individuals like Dwight Dirks, who's a graduate of the program and is today Senior Vice President for software at a small company you've all heard of, I'm sure, NVIDIA. So, and I think his tie to the school is very rich too. So Dwight and a number of others. I mean, we had some really, really great graduates who at this point were not much younger than me. Right. I was teaching students maybe 5 years younger than myself, but yet because I was doing all this research in these hybridized areas like electromagnetic fields and what does field theory have to do with anything else? Well, it has everything to do with anything else if you understand how we're networking and communicating today over 5G. People don't understand how all of these technologies lying in the background underscore serve as the foundations of all of the things we can do today. And what's really neat is as we talk about some of these new technologies, I keep having flashbacks to the days of the 80s when the PCs were just coming out. And we had peer-to-peer networks. And the only thing that allowed us to communicate with other organizations was this thing called the DARPA net, which eventually became the internet. And of course, we know that led to the World Wide Web, which has revolutionized the way we manage and share information. So I feel like somebody who was standing at Kitty Hawk when the Wright brothers took off, and now I'm standing down in Texas watching, a SpaceX first stage return and get captured by these chopsticks in midair. Except I see it in the IT area.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And those juxtapositions are what I want to get into, how you're going to compare what you saw. So, I mean, already you mentioned artificial intelligence, which people don't realize is older than 2 years old, that this is something that has been manifesting over decades and has been really, really complex, and that there's actually different elements of what constitutes AI, if it's generative or if it's just scraping or so. When we're first diving into this, I think the easiest way to frame this for the listener are what's the same today to the AI that you knew then, and what's different?
Oh, that's a good question. The foundations of AI are still the same. It's still a matter of creating an inference engine and understanding exactly what it is you're trying to infer from, the sourcing of the information. That has not changed. The tools that we use, the capabilities that we seek. Again, I'll go back to the stories of Alan Turing and what is Turing completeness? What is non-Turing completeness? These are principles that have been around for nearly a century. And yet, to talk to the average person about this, even people who are involved in writing new algorithms and developing these systems that can now modify themselves, these were all predicted a long time ago. And so there's nothing really new on the horizon, even coming at us, other than we're going to get better at doing it. We're going to be a little bit more defined. For example, AI is not limitless. Okay. Ultimately, AI will end up, as Turing predicted, and I'll probably keep dropping his name for some reason today because I just admire the creativity and innovation there. It could result in literally endless loops. It could end up in super consumption of excessive power. These are realities at the scale that we're at right now that requires us to build new sources of power. And that's why there's serious discussions again of not only rebooting nuclear plants, but now designing them and creating new ones. We cannot win in this country or in any country. Let's just put it out there and be global in our perspective. No country will win the dominance of AI without a dominant power grid system. Period. It requires power. So immediately, a lot of countries in the third world, equatorial countries and so forth, are excluded from the race in developing new AI, simply because they don't have the ability to scale. And scale is directly proportional to power, electric power. Now we're starting to see, again, the old story, how the law lags technology, come up in the control of what is proprietary information that the general purpose interpretation systems like ChatGPT and others are now scanning, absorbing, and adding to their databases in light of IP rights and copyrights. So there are tools now. There's some AI out there that will allow you to separate your proprietary information from that which is available in the public domain. But there haven't been any legal battles yet really fought and won on what happens when you do publish something on the internet. Doesn't it de facto become public domain? You've put it on the internet. You've published a book and you have an ebook out there now. And yes, people usually have paid some money to get it through a Kindle or some other bureau, but it could be sitting out there in Google Reads and therefore completely scannable and absorbable by any AI that's out there. So the law is going to continue to lag on a number of different fronts, including here in the United States, where we're very good about talking about laws and structures, but we're very slow to actually implement them, standards. And that's always been the case. But that is going to slow some things down. And as I said before, to get right back to the heart of your question, the issue of AI is not a technological innovation. That's going to find platform acceptance on new quantum computers or new AI computers. We're not even going to call them PCs anymore. They're going to be AI computers. And everybody in a couple of years here are going to have a Dell AI computer or some other brand AI computer running their home entertainment systems and their all their smart devices. And it'll be connecting you in with your finances and your investments. And we haven't even talked about the revolutionary impact of blockchain and how that is going to completely decentralize and democratize literally everything that we have come to know in the last century. So if I can give any summary on that question, it is that we are standing at the end of what I think has been the greatest century of technology development as what we would define as the computer age, and in a completely new era where technology is not just simply augmentative, but actually collaborative. It actually works with us. The AI works with us. The blockchain will work with us. And these are tools that are going to demand all sorts of changes societally and legally.
From a visionary perspective, what would that mean to be collaborative with the computer, with artificial intelligence? If let's look at an industry like real estate or healthcare, what does that collaboration look like?
Yeah, those are really good. People today are there's two camps that I see out there. One is it says, AI is like the worst thing to be released from the pits of hell. And the other one is, well, we need to embrace this because we need to basically refine what it can do, define what that is, and then make it work for us in a very almost benign way. Like, oh, don't worry about it. It's only gonna absorb some of the more routine kind of mundane things that you don't want to be bothered with anyhow. Well, I'm at that period in my life where I have literally, I use the term semi-retired, but I'm constantly being asked questions and going into companies and working with stuff, as you well know. So retirement for me is going to happen when they pry my life from my cold dead hand and I'm sitting in a casket somewhere, or some urn. But what is very clear to me is that AI in its rawest form and what we can expect in terms of a collaborative relationship with AI is that we are engaged with it. It is looking at statistics. It's looking at numbers. It's gathering sensory data in real time, faster, and processing it faster than it recognizes I can absorb it at. And it's going to provide that information to me. Again, point in my life, I'm switching from being on private insurance to going over to Medicare. I'm looking at closing out certain corporate bank accounts and looking at my overall personal portfolio and what that all involves. And I am using some fintech tools, and I'm very happy with some of the advice I am looking at getting from AI. And it's been helping me over the last couple of years in assessing, for example, investments in crypto. But there's no 5 and 10 store I can go down to and buy this AI package, and now it's going to solve all my problems. But that was also where we were with integrated accounting and manufacturing systems in the late 70s and early 80s. You couldn't just go down to the store and buy QuickBooks like you can today. So what will the AI equivalent of a QuickBooks turnkey type of solution look like when right now all we're doing is seeing what the latest flavor is, a Chaucer or a Pixel or, the latest rendition of ChatGPT. These are all being used in experimental ways and explorative ways right now. And there are some some people that would feel a little bit more defined on what collaborative AI looks like. I can't put a sheet over it. It would look like a floating ghost. And if I took it off, it would probably be as visible as a ghost. It would be fairly invisible because it could be made up of whatever composite of AI tools, arrows, so to speak, would fit in my quiver. And that's going to be very different for people in very different generations. And until, like I said before, the law catches up to the technology, there's going to be a lot of things that people are highly critical of, both ethically and lawfully, in terms of how AI is being used and developed.
If we want to look at it from the perspective of process disruption, though, which is something that you had mentioned, just so that we can sink our teeth into something and say, and start to visualize the future, because we can abstractly say that AI is going to change the world. We might not know what rate because there's many variables here, energy being one, the fine-tuning of the technology, the regulation that could completely hinder the rollouts of it. But processes, I mean, do you think that it's good for artificial intelligence to disrupt processes? Is that inherently good, progressive, and innovative, or are there ways that this is not good, and are there examples?
Well, I think within a fairly narrow scope of time, anything is going to be judged on its goodness or badness. I'm sure, at the turn of the last century, the previous century, the 1800 to 1900 change, people thought that cars were, again, something from the pit of hell. And of course, it took time before we realized we needed to have things like divided highway stop signs and yields. Before we stop, seeing horses run into cars and cars run into carriages and whatever else is there. We're at that stage. We're back to the days of the Wild West when it comes to AI. And it's not an abstraction, and it isn't, I think, a wishful thought to say that it is going to affect every aspect of our life, because it's already started affecting every aspect of our life. A case in point, the incoming presidency and his team of cost-cutting sleuths or whatever else you want to call it, government efficiency. Is that good or is that bad? Well, within a very narrow scope of time, you're going to have an opinion, because that's the way politics are. Over a much longer period, the friend of truth is time, and things will come out. But if one of the things they've indicated in some of their speeches is, well, it would really be great to have more AI being utilized in government agencies in order to streamline and improve processes. That almost suggests a presumption that they're not using it, which I think is foolish. Probably the biggest funder of AI projects of the last 30 years, maybe going back to the 1980s, has been the federal government. So, they are utilizing these, and they're recognizing big gaps in their data. Case in point is this new BOI form that corporations were expected, the benefit of ownership form, that they needed to file with the federal government, clearly indicating that the federal government, which does not oversee or collect the data, at least voluntarily, from the state's department, financial institutions, or whoever records the recognition of corporations and LLCs in states, they needed to have that fed back up. And of course, that's all. If anybody believes that has anything to do with anything, it's definitely a Treasury issue, and certainly one to try to link at the federal level where the money and so forth is flowing at the state level, which now brings up again constitutional issues. And is this even information that the federal level should even have access to? The argument has always been, sure, why not? The only people who need to worry about it are the people who are nefarious. That is not true. That people have a fundamental right of privacy in this country, and that's a penumbral right of privacy. And this affects even data. It affects the computer field. I could go on and on and on, as you well know. But the reality is that it is not an abstraction, that AI is disruptive. By its definition, it's disruptive because it's going to not only displace traditions and conventions and the usual and customaries that have been out there, but it is also, as we've discussed and as others have noted, It is the first technological innovation in the history of mankind that has the potential to actually displace labor capacity as opposed to increase labor capacity. Now, what do? These discussions of the last half a dozen years on a living income and whether that should be $1,500 or $5,000 a month or whatever is I think, a fairly veiled effort of people who have looked at the future of highly unemployed population in the United States and elsewhere, is that how can we really migrate to a new economic model in the meantime? Case in point, look at the young people graduating today with computer science and engineering degrees. They are going to job fairs in a time when you would think, boy, these people should be in great demand. And they should be recruited right out of colleges and universities like we were back in the 80s and the 90s. Not true. We don't have the compact computer companies in Texas that are hiring 5,000 new engineers and manufacturing people every month. Every month. Imagine a company out there saying that they're hiring 5,000 people a month today.
Wow.
It doesn't exist. And so you've got people graduating with college degrees, going on for advanced degrees because they can't find a job, expecting something to be out there in the next few years when their information, their knowledge is already obsolete. And maybe even their skill set is not in demand. That is the radical change here. That the disruption is so fundamental, and it's already starting to affect society, educationally, socially, economically, and so forth. And nobody's really talking about it, Matt.
I think that in particular is a good place to highlight if we want to look at actual realized disruption that is affecting people. If I were to paraphrase what you had said, it's that skill gap that has sort of emerged. Perhaps in some areas it's oversaturation, or it's that there's an actual gap between now what technology is capable of or what it requires and what humans, people, youth are being equipped with. And that discrepancy, I mean, that we could interpret that as a house of cards, because you are playing with the fabric of society and people's well-being and their income and therefore their living space. And this is, well, is this something that people were predicting at, when they first started talking about artificial intelligence? Because we can go back in time and put on sci-fi lenses and robots were running the world and, moving around. Hello, sir. And you're right. But I don't know if people really grasped the extent to which this would make some people obsolete.
Is there a question in that?
Maybe not. Maybe not. But yes, there was a little bit, because a fact as it is, should we have predicted this? And what could we have done to prepare against it? Is it that academia is lacking and that we haven't been focusing on the right studies, and preparing people? What is it?
Now that's really great. Okay, so I'm going to give you some anecdotal kind of evidence that people are always enamored and distracted by the shiny thing, right? Or the purple squirrel. A movie in the early 70s entitled Colossus, the Foreman Project, which was actually a trilogy book set, like most successful publishers and writers are these days. They like trilogies, but only the first one was actually turned into a movie. And it is a very telling movie. It uses a lot of what I would consider to be state-of-the-art technology. It involves a close cooperation between private and public sectors, and they basically create this computer called Colossus that is then engaged to take care of us. It's an AI, and it takes over the power grid. It takes over the defense systems. It takes over all sorts of things because people believe that all you really need to do is have this one shut-off button here, and everything will be fine. Your man is always in complete control, right? So we'll just hit the shut-off button. Except as soon as they turn it on, I think it's within a matter of minutes, it realizes there's another, and it actually displays there's another on the display. And at the same time, if you remember that period, it was still prior to really the separation of the Berlin Wall and glasnost and perestroika and all these wonderful things that blossomed in Russia with the breakup of the Soviet Union and so forth. So there was the space war was on, the defense war was on, and so the other is a computer called Guardian that appears over in Russia. And again, the focus is sci-fi, but it's not too far beyond, I think, reach to realize that these computers had the ability to network and eventually communicate with one another. The computers themselves actually lay out the designs to do that. They actually create the designs to augment themselves so they can do speech recognition and speech patterns, so they don't have to use their little Model 33 teletypes that talk at 110 bits per second, which, by the way, was my first terminal. So the movie itself has a lot of capability in terms of its vision and what it does, but it is illustrative of exactly what people do. They focus on the tech. They focus on the thing, the purple squirrel, the shiny thing. So you ask the question, should we not have seen the consequences beyond the AI and what the implications of the AI are and the disruptions that are occurring? Should we have not been better prepared? And the answer is it's not human nature to do that. It's human nature to get stuck on whatever the shiny thing is that's right in front of us. And there's probably no greater illustration of that being today in our society than the amount of time people spend scrolling on their phones in front of social media. They have the attention span has dropped typically from 5, 6, 7 seconds to 2 or 3 seconds, and they're on to the next thing. They need to be satisfied. Whatever satisfying needs to be visually appealing. And the consequences of it are damned. They are not thinking in terms of the value of education. I think that's also, a statement of the lack of regard for authority that seems to be more prominent today, especially in schools, than ever before. There is no respect of chain of command. A perfect example is I don't run around insisting people call me doctor. I'm fairly egalitarian, but that's my choice. I'm amazed at the number of youth that will just approach somebody and talk to them on a first name basis as a matter of introduction. The propriety, there's a difference between behavior and propriety, and we can't seem to get that straight in society. So holding the door for a gentleman holding the door for a woman, and I don't mean to sound like I got gray hair that's falling out, but you know what? That's propriety. We were raised with, this is how you do it. It's not a question of debate. This is what you do. And you don't do it mindlessly. You do it out of respect for the other party. You address people properly. You don't use profanity. Today it's on the radio, it's on TV. There's just things that you did not do. And that's propriety. That's different than asking people to behave appropriately. Don't do that. I'm going to punish you if you do that. And so this used to be a class distinction. And I'm bringing this up because we're going to have people who have to make decisions about technology like AI or what should and should not be part of a data owner process. Who owns data, for example? Who owns your personal data? Everything about you in the United States is still not governed by law. We do not have a data ownership law in the United States. So these gatherers, the Facebooks and the Googles, and whether it's the Magnificent Seven or other companies, they're gathering this information on you almost with impunity because they feel they have a right to that information. Well, because we haven't defined a sense of propriety. My information is mine. It's not theirs. I share it with you temporarily, but until we legislate the fact that propriety dictates what is mine and what is borrowed, we're never going to have that clear, and they're going to continue to exploit that information and share it with advertising agencies and all sorts of things. And we know what the end result of that is. It's just, more and more spam, more and more bad text, a lot more confusion, and so much distraction. And I think that's really what this comes down to. The technology is the distraction. And it's so shiny and so big and so worthy of investment and time that it allows the more necessary requirements to define a society as a whole to be marginalized. That debate is marginalized. They do not want to have these discussions because somewhere along that line, they're going to have to come back to what are the standards of propriety versus functioning on behavior. Now, the people who have taken psychology know exactly what I'm talking about because they understand the difference between functioning on propriety and functioning on behavior. And functioning on propriety means there has to be a set of standards. This is where we start seeing things like AI and blockchain, and the people who implement and design these systems start collapsing because they believe that these tools are limitless. And in being limitless, that means that they can basically do anything. Well, wisdom dictates that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And until those lines and standards are drawn, nothing good is going to come of this except the power brokers, which are largely today big tech, big pharma, big everything, big government. And that whole goal of democratization is going to find its way marginalized, even in the space that we've been talking about, like real estate tokenization, things like that. We want an egalitarian society, leveled largely through technology. But until we get the power brokers engaged in what that really means, including them being egalitarian, and a quick example on that, the shameless stock portfolios of elected officials who are voting and influencing regulations on companies that they are turning around and investing in. And it is the most gross illustration of insider trading because they are outsiders that are influencing the insiders. So what's worse? These are discussions we're having today, this week, as a matter of fact. And so these are discussions we've always had. It's just now technology is going to disrupt even our social systems to the point where we're going to have this debate.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's for futurists. Yeah. It's now. That's the
thing.
Right. This is not futurist, as you know, Matt. You're engaged in this field. You talk to a lot of people, a lot smarter than me out there, and they'll all tell you the same thing. We are at a precipice, and either we're going to jump off and hope that we land on some soft trees at the bottom, or we're going to hit a lot of rocks on the way down. But either way, it is not a hopeful sight for those who really think in terms of consequences. Because somebody has to be in control. Democratization means it's the people. Well, the people need to get their act together. And that's when we get back to skill sets. That's when we get back to understanding things like Turing completeness and why systems can't do everything and why they shouldn't do everything. And then to have an ethical compass that draws on that. And all of these things almost like we're building a startup from scratch. Like nobody's ever thought about these things before, but they were always there.
That's incredible. This is one of those moments where I wish I could bounce back 15 seconds and just re-listen to what you said. And I encourage anyone to do that because I think for many people who are hearing these things for the first time, it's a lot to digest because it's a new depth of technology where you are adding the elements of ethics, I think would be the right way to look at this. And while people do that at a surface level, should AI have bias and give me an answer that leans in a political direction? There's more depth to this. And I think the talk about proprietariness is relevant because if you're going to talk about processes and disruption there, then you have to talk about how people function in the first place and how they think and the psychological component there. Now, you raised the topic of democratization a couple times, and you had mentioned blockchain, and people are associating these two items and data autonomy. So how do you see that artificial intelligence, data privacy and autonomy, programmable systematic elements of society can start to manifest through something like blockchain?
Great question. Obviously, the baby boomer X-gender mentality has been one of resignation when it comes to data. It's out there. We're never going to collect it back. People are sharing it on the dark web. Heck, they're sharing it on the light web. It's all over the place. So what our generation, my generation, as the end of the baby boomer period, needs to realize, and many of us are in legislative roles and leadership roles in companies and so forth, is that we've got to stop communicating and dealing with other generations, cross-generational groups, whether it's within our company or within our state or local region or within our country, as if they're all baby boomers. They see things completely differently, as we talked about earlier. Their attention span is shorter. And that's not to say that people my age don't have a short attention span. It's just that they are probably less likely to be engaged on jumping when they hear a text message come in or an email ping or something like that than people who are Z, certainly the upcoming alpha and millennials that are out there. So AI, again, we have to have some standards. If we say that the information that we own is not our own and that somehow we've resigned, whether it's through resignation, it's out there anyhow, so they have it, whoever needs it. That's a problem because it's still my information and I should still be entitled to collect that back. And we should have legal processes that ensure that when I request my information, I'll give you an example. You provide your social security number, your birthday, and all sorts of things to get an account so that you can get a credit card in Amazon. But once they've assigned a credit limit and they've assigned an account number, why do they need to retain that in their computer systems subject to break-in, subject to hacking? They don't need it. They've already assigned you an account number and a dollar amount. So why would I even want that information maintained there? Well, okay, they may stipulate, particularly in a proceeding, that they need to get rid of that and they need to make it disappear as soon as the account's assigned, and they'll just track the transactions. Well, then what about the transactions? Whose business is it of anybody's but my own why I particularly read these authors or these genres or access these movies? I get the marketing value of that. I'm not ignorant, right? We know that there's marketing intelligence in that. I just like to know who they're selling it to and why. And if they're making money off of it, I think I should be entitled on that yes or no to a piece of that action. That's compensation for me. What really happens, though, is that information, at least in the eyes of the alphas and the Zs, and maybe to some extent millennials, is a little bit more protective. They have been raised in an online structure that says don't give out birthdays, don't even give out your real name on social media, don't say anything in your headset when you're on your game box or you're on your Xbox or you're on your PS station. So families have responded to the basic ethical issues of just safe surfing, so to speak, if we could call it that. But that information that Amazon has, and I'm just using them as an example. I'm not saying they're doing this. I'm not even saying they would do this. But let's just say all those transactions are there. And I have an equivalent set of transactions at my bank, and I have an equivalent set of transactions at my big box shop down the street where I go buy my Wallywood stuff. And, there's all these transactions out there. My health records at 3 different networks here in the metropolitan area, right? We have 3 different major networks, and I got health records on all of them. All of these systems susceptible today to hackers, every single one of them. And in fact, the solution for security is a really good place to talk about the fact that we are really still very much in that age of the Wild West. If we had truly secure solutions to these problems, why do we still have break-ins? Is it because people who are hacking are just smarter than the people who are designing the machines? I know that's not it at all. It's just that we keep reinventing, rewriting, software over and over again on the same architecture that we've known has been flawed since the 60s. And in fact, even network structures with 5G, that's the first departure from communication systems we've had since World War II. So when you look at the history of technology and how that comes into being, and I don't mean to ramble, but the fact of the matter is we can't even get the security system straight. And now we're proposing something like blockchain that's virtually impenetrable, at least until quantum computing becomes desktop. And even then, there are going to be new variants on blockchain. And I shouldn't even just say blockchain. Distributed ledger technology and decentralization is the broader picture that will actually solve a lot of today's problems. But as all new solutions do, they introduce new sets of problems in the future. So now it comes back on itself. It's like the snake eating its tail. It will come back on itself, and we will have a new set of concerns and criteria. Today, it's personal data. About 8 years ago or so, the World Economic Forum, whether you think they're a good organization, bad organization, political or not political, is irrelevant in this discussion, in this context. They came out and said that there is basically a data owner's bill of rights. And it is that you own your data. Why is that so hard to convince corporations in the form of governments around the world to accept that notion, and then to do the necessary legislative work to ensure that my data belongs to me? And here's the answer to where we were talking about putting all of our transactions on all these different systems subject to hacking. I'd like all my records, thank you, stored on my blockchain, my personal blockchain. And that was something that I created with the help of some people when I was running a software company out here, Milwaukee. That organizer of your personal data completely inverted the storage model that we're used to for the last 100 years. Turing never said that the storage had to be within the system that was doing the computation. It just had to have the capability of storing. Blockchain says you don't have to store your data on the system that's doing the computation. You can store it on mine. And I can control who has access to that, who can write it, who can read it. And the beautiful thing is they can't change it. That's the beautiful thing of blockchain. So there are technological solutions, but it's going to take time.
So what I want to do as we start to approach kind of like the 2/3, 3/4 mark is give you an opportunity to talk about what you're doing in HR, because this is not an area that I'm in at all. I can't comment on it, but I would love if you could enlighten me where you see that industry going, how you're applying technology, what you're working on.
Thanks, Matt. That's a great example too, that illustrates, I think, topically why blockchain, AI, and so forth are going to have a great impact. Look, companies exist today because they have a product or service they sell, and we often focus, obviously, on the financial administration and operations of the company and producing that service. But it takes people, and the people process, and has always been, I guess, an area of systems evolution as opposed to revolution. The HR people tend to be conservative. They tend to take a much more static approach to systems and processes. We've even gone to the point now where we don't even use the term personnel anymore in the industry. That's gone. And in fact, HR is probably going to dissipate in the near term, replaced with things like people and culture officers. And that's not because HR people are just, I guess, disenchanted with the way things are going, or somehow think that they have a superior mindset to what HR should be in some sort of newly defined corporate organization. Every department in an organization, and it doesn't matter if you're a small and medium-sized business hoping to scale one day to enterprise class, or you're that enterprise class that is faced with things like divestitures and mergers and acquisitions, and you're dealing with the workforces that are there. HR affects everybody that is going to work, period. And in working, those people are eventually going to retire. And in order to work, you have to be prepared. So when we're talking about working the HR process, we can be so extreme. We can be so extended out there on the fringe to suggest, like people like Elon Musk, who believes that he's trying to establish an academic center down in Texas, right? So he can literally bring people up in a fashion of education that in many ways, I have to say this, I haven't seen his curriculum or the syllabi there, but my guess is that it's going to go back to fundamental human skills, sensory skills, reading, writing, logical thinking, exercise, all of the things that seem to have kind of disappeared or waned over the years. We used to trigger the creative nature of young people by engaging them in things like theater arts and music, and art, and those programs have gone by the wayside. Foreign languages too. Somehow, I don't know whose thought it was to get rid of foreign languages, but we live in a global community today. When I went to high school, we'll just say that that Greek, Latin, and Spanish were on my menu for foreign languages. I had Spanish since 5th grade because the Catholic school I went to was led by a group of nuns that were in collaboration with the Jesuit order, promoting something new called liberation theology and sharing that with countries all over South and Central America. And so they were preparing us for the ultimate integration and assimilation of Spanish-speaking cultures. So I had it in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. In fact, 12th grade, we didn't have Spanish 4. We had immersion. We had Spanish for juniors, and in senior year, we read all the literature that was major, what we call Spanish literature equivalents of the day. And then I had 2 years of Latin, 2 years of Greek in high school. Today, we've assimilated so many different cultures that there's students that are sitting in classes that actually talk 2 or 3 and understand 2 or 3 languages, especially if they've come from some faraway places like the Ukraine or Eastern Europe, which I've had recent exposure to here in our community. We have a lot of people who come from Eastern Europe. And so they're sitting in our public schools, many of them in high school, not nearly as young as elementary school, but they are there, who had never spoken English before, but yet have a command of all these foreign languages. So when I think of what the future of schooling looks like, I think it looks a lot like the past, except it's the better parts of the past. Again, let me go back to egalitarianism. What are the skills you need? I tell people I went into engineering for 3 reasons: English, history, and geography. Because in an engineering program, you didn't take English, history, and geography. And yet I sit here before you in front of your community of followers and people listening into the podcast and tell you that the 3 reasons for my success in life is English, history, and geography. It's not because I can write software. It's not because I can do hardware. And so it's that ability to think. It's that ability to be resourceful. It's and some of these things you're born with. There are skills like learning other languages, writing well, that, well, even today, look at ChatGPT, right? I don't think legitimate journalists and authors of books need to worry all about, a whole new realm of AI authors coming out there and writing write a novel about this monster in the style of Stephen King, but utilize my vocabulary, which you've already assimilated from dozens of documents that you've read and processed of mine. And then all of a sudden I got a Stephen King class novel coming out. That'll be on the new. That's not going to happen. You still need a great author to read the works that are produced by these AIs. And same thing with artwork or graphics. That we are so early, so nascent in what this is. That the skill sets that are required are not going to deal with technology. I should complete that. The skill sets that are required to deal with technology are not going to supplant the basic skill sets that we need as human beings to interact with one another. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
That's the challenge. This is not going to be like we saw in Colossus. The computers are not going to take over our lives. And by the way, the movie ends nihilistically on the computer staying in control, right? So if I've spoiled it for you folks, I think you can go online and watch it. It's still a great film. And I understand that Will Smith's company actually has the rights to reboot it and do something, and has been sitting on this for about 8 or 10 years. which is unfortunate because I think he could have probably put some money into this, talked to a simple consultant or two like myself or people who are in the field, and probably came up with a real whiz-bang vision of exactly what's going on in the 2020s globally. So the issue really does come down to preparedness. And when we look in HR and we're looking at education and all of that feeding into the workforce, and then we're bringing in people who then we have to teach. You have to continue to invest and develop your workforce. And then achievement is key to that. Gamification, all these things that have risen to the forefront of the millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and to some extent the Gen X folks in the whole gaming industry. They expect rewards. So wellness, mental wellness. Look at the challenge going on today. People have gotten used to working from home, and now they're being told you can't work from home. You have to come back in. By the way, it doesn't take much real estate knowledge to realize that the companies that are the loudest preaching that are the ones that own the buildings that were previously occupied. They're not leasers. So what does this really mean for HR? Everything changes. It's going to change not only because of the way we work today, and that was really due to the pandemic. I believe, it's my speculation, there's nothing, numerical to go to verify this, but I believe that the adoption of advanced technologies accelerated by about 20 to 40 years during those 2 years of the pandemic. And the reason for that is just empirically, look at your parents, grandparents, people who are using Zoom today. Right. Would you have ever gotten them to use Zoom before the pandemic? Never, right? Never. Just doesn't work. So this is a very exciting period when we talk about social interaction and how the workforce is now programmed and expecting to work with one another, hybrid work of the future. I do a lot of podcasts and talking with people about these issues. And again, we're in the midst of change. So how will this all wash out in the end? Well, there is no crystal ball. There is no one way of doing that. And a good example again is blockchain. All the information today that we store in HR systems, in our proprietary monolithic systems, is like work performance, things that would be shareable to verify, for example, that you even worked for my company going to another company, and that information being portable in the application process for that company. I think LinkedIn, Microsoft, some of these companies that are out there, the ZipRecruiters and so forth, have a long way to go before they realize that their centralization of that information without verification like you have with blockchain is really a problem set. It's a Pandora's box that they cannot afford to open. But if I get control of my data and I'm working with things like my university, my employers, my government agencies in terms of licensing, my certifications and so forth, there's absolutely no reason why that can't be immutably stored on a blockchain and instantly accessed, instantly verified. It still takes dozens of days to find a candidate and to bring them on board. Despite what the commercials tell you on TV, you put in your job and you'll have a qualified candidate the next day. We had software 10 years ago in that software company that matched people to jobs instantaneously. We'd go through a database of 20,000 people and come up with people instantaneously, seconds. They can't make those guarantees because they know the data is not valid. And until they really start validating it, and still we start cleaning it and doing that, that's going to be a problem. So HR can't sit on the back burner. And it didn't have a choice during the pandemic. It was literally thrust into the forefront. And officers in the C-suite were saying, how can we continue to operate with people working remotely? And at that point, HR technology went from that back burner to the front burner. And so today, what we're seeing are the grooming of new CHROs, new senior HR officers, who need to be technically savvy because they're going to be making these decisions as to what technologies to use, what technologies to invest in, and then what is the impact on the learning and development of the workforce and on the competitive edge. So HR becomes more strategic as a business partner within organizations than ever before. And that means that the processes, the systems, the ethics, the code of conduct, the things that HR people had not really had had to subscribe to in the past. In fact, many organizations, the HR person just came up from an administrator rank or some sort of role handling paperwork in the organization. No, there's universities today that have HR degrees at the bachelor level. I'm not saying that degrees are the answer either. I'm simply saying a passion for what you do, a love for what you do, will draw you into areas that you'll naturally want to study and work in. And HR, with the technology collaboration augmentation component of that, only has a greater demand being put on it in the future, and therefore a lot of opportunities for people who want to go into that career.
So if I understand, based off of some of the links that you sent me, you're working on a solution here. Is that a good way to describe it? Would it even classify as a startup? Can we call it a startup?
No, I wouldn't say that. But the beautiful thing is I've been part of a global community of HR technology experts. And believe me, the perspectives are similar but not the same, whether you're in Australia, Singapore, South Africa, Amsterdam, the United States. Even differences between the US and Canada are stark when it comes to HR. All of the systems that are out there today have evolved from mainframes through the mini computer, microcomputer networking, Web 1, and now Web 2 age. Web 3, as you well know, is not just a new term of how we interact with things over the World Wide Web. It's architected differently, right? Our architecture has always been, a basic hardware platform, an operating system, a relational database, and then we graduated to things like APIs and all sorts of ways to interact with this. And for those who are really into this, they might even be out there in really cool fields like edge computing, where devices so cool like your phone are gathering data in real time and keeping that data locally, but talking to something in the back end and storing that. The thing with Web3 is the underlying architecture is not defined in silicon. It's not defined in a semiconductor chip. It's defined in the design of the blockchain. The blockchain, which is really defined in software, both in an abstract and in a very real way, is the architecture. So how am I going to rewrite my payroll system, my timekeeping system, my basic records? I can't hatch my way to Web3 when I have a completely new architecture. And this is the news that I do share with people. And I've been sharing it now for about 5 years. And both the consortium DEHR, which is a global consortium focused on decentralized HR, that is standards and that is governance issues. And we're working with not only HR associations in countries all around the world, and in some cases, by the way, the HR associations are actually government agencies in places like the Emirates and Bahrain and places like that, or the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. These are where the government is really the HR department, something that's completely foreign to us except for government workers in the Office of Personnel Management in the United States. We have a couple million people working in the government, but and that makes them the largest HR department in the country. But by no means is it like running the entire country. We have private enterprise, we have public enterprise, we have state and local level governments that all have their own HR processes. So there is no one solution for that. But my point is that all these solutions that are out there, and by the way, most organizations of any size, and I'm talking about maybe more than 500 employees, maybe 1,000, but certainly at least 500, may have as many as 16 different applications that define their HR system. And they're not all from one vendor. Many of them involve a minimum of 3 or 4 vendors and a lot more than that. So when we're talking, we can't even get our language together on what is an HR IT solution, what is an HR management system, and what is a human capital management system. I mean, there's all these terms out there that we have to nail down. So that is the stuff I am involved with. I do work with that through the HR Association. So terminology is important, certification, so we can all talk about Turing machines at our wine tasting and that sort of thing. That becomes important. But what really drives this is keeping the workforce moving, keeping the workforce growing, keeping the economy going, and no debate around basic living wages supplied by government income program is going to eliminate that. And not in our lifetime, maybe in the next century. And we'll leave that up to the futurists and science fiction writers to deal with that. But today, we need to find people who have the basic talents and thinking, speaking, doing so with courtesy and delivery, inoffensively. These are the things that schools, unfortunately, are not producing. And college, in many cases, has become almost an advanced high school. And I know my colleagues in academia are going to probably get a couple of boards together and maybe some feathers and a little oil and try to get me out of town. But the reality is that students are different today than they were even 30, 40 years ago. Education is in itself an end stop. It's not considered a stepping stone to something better because they don't really view what's better. They don't envision that. They just assume a check is going to come. I'm going to get married, or I'm not going to get married. I'm going to have a house. I'm not going to have a house. And those generational trends are all different between the baby boomers all the way down to the alphas. And unless we look at things cross-generationally, we have good data-driven analyses. We don't try to run our lives based on data, but we should be making optimal decisions involving data, like smart cities. People don't realize that. They talk about smart cars and Teslas and all these other wonderful vehicles, but they don't realize that the infrastructure that's really required to take a true advantage of that for the benefit of the society are smart cities. Well, what does that involve? I don't know. I haven't seen any committee meetings yet, even here in my own city, on what the future of this town will look like as a smart city. But yet they're still planning, multi-tenant apartments and infrastructure on electrical and sewage systems and water systems. But where's the smartness? Well, it's not there yet. The discussions aren't there. So what do we need to do? We need to bring up the level of technology knowledge among our youth, the people who are going to lead us, people your age, and I consider you youth, and I deal with a lot of youth, people who are very innovative and inventive. They need to have avenues and they need to have funding to support these ideas. And we shouldn't be in too much of a hurry to make it all happen overnight. It's not going to. Mm-hmm. That is the big thing. And workforce management, workforce relationship management, all becomes a part of that within organizations, whether they're innovative or not, whether they're just making pipes, bending metal, producing wood, or they're coming out with these, the next whiz-bang central processor for AI, or a data center down on 94. All of these things require people, and technology is never, at least not in my lifetime, that's probably a sure bet. Maybe, I could probably say technology will never replace the human component in the workforce. It'll displace capacity, but those people who are displaced are going to have to find purpose in continuing their education or getting certification or doing something else. Otherwise, we are left with the government providing basic living income. And that's, as you well know, is a very, very hot political debate.
It absolutely is. You mentioned smart cities, and this was something that I integrated into Next Gen Milwaukee, which, on a side note, at this time, depending on when this episode is released, I'm planning on making Next Gen Milwaukee location agnostic, but still talking about these same concepts, because you're very right that if we talk about real estate development and infrastructure and societal norms, but we're not actually bringing people together to talk about how that's going to be orchestrated and the connectivity required and what impact that has, perhaps throwing out the term smart cities, then we can't successfully conduct that. To use the term orchestrate and conduct, I'd like to make a symphony, analysis. The instruments are all playing on their own. And you have little packs of violins that are creating technology that's going to disrupt finance and transportation. And then you have a pack of trombones releasing regulation that is, and these things are just coordinated. And that was what I wanted to stimulate a little bit with Next Gen Milwaukee. It's tough as a small organization, but what you've just discussed highlights the purpose for something like that, and at large, why this podcast exists as well. Because we need to continue to have these conversations. We need people to have a little light bulb that appears over their head, and perhaps they continue the conversation with their peers, or they start to roll out a solution, or similar to a conversation I had with Ian Kane, who is a part of the city of Quincy and great blockchain advocate, is that we need more advocacy. We need people who come together, they form groups, and they say, we want to see this implemented in the city. We want to see solutions around this. We're going to continue to raise our voice on this topic until something is implemented. And the least that we can do, if we want to bring this full circle and talk about why didn't we predict what AI could have done? Well, here is the foundation to do that for at least the next 10, 20 years, where we can say, what conversations do we need to have now? If we put the shiny object aside, what is going under the radar that someone needs to solve, to think about? So many topics that you've covered today are, I think, things that people need to bounce back, re-listen to, and think, well, how can I impact that? What can I do? Where is there an opportunity? And there's always an incentive. If it's a problem, then develop a solution. And there's going to be an incentive, monetary perhaps, or just societal change, which leads me to the last thing I wanted to ask you about. So you've got 2 trademarked, it seems, names that you offer yourself. the Tech Tamer and the Change Catalyzer. Break those down for me, please.
Oh, man. Okay. So Tech Tamer is really easy. I've never been intimidated to get into the fenced area with tech, right? That's the thing. People, particularly as I was growing up from my teens in the 70s all the way through, I love tech. Get me into tech. I like playing with stuff. When I could get onto the original release of ChatGPT, I could be into beta programs, even with Microsoft. I go all the way back to 1983, before Windows was even really released, being a beta tester. I just love testing and looking at things. And then what it does, it's kind of like the modern day kind of approach to Legos or Lincoln Logs. My creative side was already stimulated, and technology was a natural thing for me. I built a hovercraft when I was 15 years old and put it in a science fair and won a bunch of awards, right? Things like that. But technology is not science. I think people confuse the two, right? And maybe that's what we need to do. I am not a science tamer. I'm not somebody to sit there with a whiteboard and just put up all sorts of differential equations and solve these rather abstract ideas. I've always been one who thought, this is really cool being used in this area over here, like my work in computer performance, which ultimately was my doctorate, right? I took something I learned in electromagnetic field theory and digital signal processing called fast Fourier transforms. And what the fast Fourier transform does is it converts time domain data, like audio sounds coming out of a speaker, into frequency data, like you would see on a graphic equalizer, right? You have different bands of frequencies. And what I did was I computed the effective bandwidth of computer systems before they, some had already existed, some did not. But what I could do with my simulator and my model is basically compute the effective bandwidth of a computer system. At the time, it was a big deal because we were talking about downloading all sorts of really advanced imaging satellite data from something called Star Wars, the Strategic Defense Initiative. And they needed to know whether or not the computers that the government contracted suppliers, the IBMs, the Amdals, the Cray researchers, were going to actually be able to compute the analyses that had to be done. And they had to do so in a black box. They couldn't actually tell the manufacturers what the application really was. So we had to compute this ability. All right, so that's a paradigm shift. And you'll see there isn't a conversation I have with people that doesn't involve paradigm shift discussion. That's almost like Turing machines. So paradigm is when you pick something up in one area and you apply it over in another, whether it makes sense to do that or not. So when we're looking at something like frequency domains or frequency analysis, this is exactly what we're talking about in terms of bandwidth of computers. Well, that's technology that's been around for a long time. That's why EKGs look like they do and why people can predict heart failures and things like that. So what comes about in all of this is fundamentally letting people feel that they have ownership in the things that they truly are told they have ownership in. We talked about already in terms of my digital personality, my digital twin. I own that. The law doesn't say so yet, but I think that's coming. So what we need to do is let our elected representatives know and deal with the more high-profile senators and Congress people that are involved in data privacy, like Josh Hawley and others, and let them know that, yeah, we need to have this law. We need to know that we own the data. From there, a whole lot of bricks now just fall into place in terms of what data gatherers can do. You go a little bit further on this in terms of the community now. All right, our community, and I don't know if I'm assuming your broadcast is a lot like the other ones that I dealt with, and you are global. People are listening to you all around the world. So I'm not going to shame Milwaukee. I'm not going to just focus on Milwaukee. But we'll just say that many cities today, urban centers, are really struggling with crime. They're struggling with employment. They're struggling with infrastructure and how to address all these things because people really don't feel they're a part of the community. I hate to say that. Maybe again, they're going to get those boards and that tar and those feathers ready for me. But Milwaukee has been a highly segregated city for decades, maybe the better part of the last century. And unfortunately, there are concentrations of crime. There are also concentrations of dilapidated homes and abandoned multi-tenant family buildings and commercial buildings. And you could probably name, Matt, because you're so connected with the community, you could probably name the top 5 developers that are in there buying up these properties and trying to develop something out of them, right? It's a small community. The problem is that the approach we take to these kinds of issues are still centrally minded. They're still centrally controlled. You know, the only way we talk about tokenization in real estate that people feel they have the ability to own, and a lot of people don't, a lot of people are locked out of owning real estate, is through tokenization. It will democratize and revolutionize that. What happens when everybody in the community is no longer just a renter of a home in that community, but an owner, even fractionally in that community? It changes the dynamic. You now no longer throw trash on the street. You no longer double park. You no longer disrespect people's rights to walk, walkways and easements. You now are part of the community that's building it. When communities were smaller, that was different. Even early 1900s New York and late 1800s New York, as the city was growing, communities were really built around cultures of people who had a common caring for one another. We don't have that today. And that is a necessary component to actually implement decentralization. If they own, they will treat it differently than if they don't. And I think that's what has to happen in these urban areas. I can't give solutions to every problem, but I can give a process. And that process begins with buy-in. Buy-in's like you talked about, advocacy. Okay, why am I advocating? What is the call to action? I'm advocating so that you will become an active participant in that process. And we have to make those roads available. We have to give pathways for people to buy. Let's tokenize the entire city of Milwaukee. Let's tokenize everything, every land that's owned by the city. And now you tokenize it. And people who are living here and have lived here and want to live here it's like stockholders of the Green Bay Packers, right? I have a Green Bay Packers stock. It's really cool. Everybody, oh, you're a stockholder. That makes it different. That's why the Green Bay Packers can have the crappiest season, or they can have star quarterbacks and linemen. And yet the energy level is always there that's pro-Packer. I've never heard a person ever say anything really negative about the packers and never a stockholder. It's the same thing with everything else. Get people to buy in, give them a pathway of affordability, and find a way out of the credit debt crisis that we're in, which is horrible. I mean, all these things are burdens on society. Whether we're paying for the interest on the debt of the government, we're paying for interest on the debt of our academic scholarships or loans, I'm sorry, or we're paying for interest on credit cards or having these really big mortgages. We need to remove those burdens, but we can do that in a systematic way when we have proper sharing and that today is in the form of tokenization. And we live at a time when the technology is here to do it. We didn't have this technology. When your people say, well, why didn't we do this before? We didn't have the technology to do it. We do now. We now have to find a way to educate the masses so that they don't think it's abstract and some sort of concept in vaporware, that it really does exist. And then we have to give them an opportunity to buy in. I taught a course, Tech Tamer, right? It was Tech Tamer time. I taught a course that was a year long on crypto and everything about the crypto economy, mining, minting, and making a profit, how you would do that. And this was during, I think it might have been on the second half on the flip side of COVID. I had 24 people in the class. My youngest was 23. My oldest was 95. And every one of them participated throughout the year. It was a 2-hour lecture once a month with 2-hour meetings one-on-one. So it was kind of a time consumer for me. But everybody was engaged because I would reward them. The very first thing we did is set up a wallet. And the very first thing I did was reward them for just doing those steps with a token amount of crypto. Now they had a reason to go look. Now they had a reason to be involved. And all of them today, with those, I've had a couple of those students actually pass away. The vast majority of them have stayed up with adding crypto. So they're out there talking about XRP, or they're talking about not just Ethereum and Bitcoin, but they're talking about Shiba Inu and some of the meme coins. And they can actually discuss it at their wine tasting at the bar, if you get my meaning.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for doing that. I think that's just overall good. I mean, it's good on so many different levels. The engagement, an engagement of different demographics. Age is usually a barrier in crypto. You have to be young or savvy to get involved, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I applaud you and thank you for approaching this. And I'm actually a little intrigued, how you delivered some of these concepts. I think if people were more effective at that, this industry at large would be moving out of a crawl and into a walk, just the education components and having people be comfortable with it and understand, like you mentioned, not the abstractness of it, but practicality and seeing utility from it. So I think that's great. And then the little things like actually giving people crypto. I mean, that's an incentive. That's a net positive to them. And you gave your time and I assume some capital in order to do that. So I hope that this in general inspires people, right? I hope people think, hey, I could do something like that. I should do something like that. There's now is the time. I'll pause the podcast and I am going to start this and see where it goes.
So that's the tech tamer side, right? That's everybody's a potential tech tamer. The other side is change catalyst, and I'll just give you 30 seconds on that. I have learned that my role in organizations, whether I'm sitting on the board of directors or I'm sitting in an office meeting or I'm having a coffee, talking to somebody who's about ready to do a startup, that my presence there is sufficient to affect change. I am not a change manager. I'm not a change agent. I don't take the ideas of change from other people and somehow convince everybody else that they need to do it. I show up at a meeting, change is inevitable. So when I joined this association for HR technology, I was invited back in 2018. I sat quietly just observing the organization in 2019 and saw that this was an organization of very well-meaning people who didn't know how to run a business. Is basically what it was. I'm an engineer that can read a balance sheet and write contracts, right? And as you know, I went to law school and graduated at 58. I mean, I'm just a consummate learner. I believe in lifelong learning. I think we all have to have that commitment. Again, another cultural change. We can go back to the better aspects of work, but we don't have to go back to the worst aspects of post-World War II, where we're trying to make up for the devastating loss of life and coming back to a different kind of country altogether. Or we can be winners every single day if we're all in the same mindset that we want to make life better, we want to do something better. So as a change catalyst, I'm always looking at how we can improve something. And so, it took a couple of years, and I built partnerships, and now IREM strategically works with the organizations that produce things like the great conferences that are in Las Vegas and Amsterdam and Singapore on HR technology around the world. I have an opportunity to speak here from my little train room and my little office to folks in South Africa in the middle of the night, my time, right? Our time. But you go where you're called and you go where you're moved. And I think you go and where you're effective, and you will be effective if you go. I mean, happy people make good things happen. I have a friend who actually believes that. And he's a very, very famous radio broadcaster, has his own syndicated show. He will tell you happy people make things happen for the better. Unhappy people don't. And when you sit down and you look at that, again, it's so fundamentally human to see that. AI won't make things better or worse. The people who use AI and put the material to work, they're going to make things better or worse. So we have an obligation to really build up society that way. So we all have the ability to actually be catalysts for change, and not just agents, managers, or worse yet, just objects, right? We need to be the cause of our surroundings and not the effect. We need to have that positive attitude that was published back in the 1950s by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. These are not impracticalities. These are not abstractions. These are actual tools and ways to do neuroplastic type programming of the mind, so that when you wake up every morning, you have two goals in mind: do something good for yourself and do something good for somebody else. If we could just get that across people, do something good for yourself. What is that? Investing in education, eating right, having good health, having healthy relationships with people. Do something good for somebody else. What is that? Shoveling the snow, mowing the lawn, encouraging an employee who is struggling financially. People who we think are the most together in the world are probably the ones that need the most nurturing, because they have to hide. They have to put on a facade that's out there. The scary thing of technology is that's going to reveal a lot of that, right? It's going to show the numbers. It's going to show the objective stats. So what do we do with that? We catalyze. We need to catalyze for positive change. And so, so I grabbed the term, I threw a trademark on it, and people don't invite me to meetings unless they want change. So there it is.
That's a perfect place to wrap up. I mean, this whole episode has been rich with gems of knowledge and wisdom and inspiration, I think. And I don't want to dilute the importance of the message, because great educational things, but I think that last component's about just the mentality, because we can talk about tech all day, but it's people. It is people at the end of the day. It's people who mobilize technology and change and make decisions. And I think you're really the first to take that spin, that perspective on the code portion of Code and Concrete. And so thank you. I mean, it is the perfect bow on top of the Christmas gift of a podcast episode that you have just given all of us.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Absolutely.
Anything you need, you know that. Anything you need, I'll be there.
Well, if people want to get in touch with you and talk further, where's the best place to do that?
Well, obviously LinkedIn is a good location to start off. But if you have something more urgent, you need to get me, hit my website, Sagacity, SAGACITY -LLC.com. You can drop me a note through that. I won't put my email out there unless you want me to. You could send something to my Gmail account if you'd like, dennis.hill.phd, or eliminate the dots. A lot of people don't know they can eliminate the dots on their emails from Gmail, just dennishillphd@gmail.com. And I will make every effort to respond within a day or two at most. Well, in a world of almost maybe 8 billion people, I remember when we weren't even talking that high a number, connections were harder to make. Today, they're very easy to make, but value-rich connections are really, really rare, and I count you among those, Matt. I really appreciate your reaching out when you did with NextGen. I'm a full supporter of NextGen anything, NextGen everything, right? NextGen Milwaukee is just the start, but we need a NextGen world. And we've got so much disparity, so much wide-ranging differences that we all do need to become tech tamers, and we all need to become change catalyzers, and we all need to be happy people thinking positive change for the world. And you're one of those people. I'm very proud to call you a friend. And thank you for having me on your show today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And for everyone who joined us today, I hope that this was insightful on many levels, internally and your heart, your minds, and hopefully externally as you go out and take action. So thank you, everyone. Dennis's links are going to be in the show notes. And until next time on Coding Concrete, thank you, Dennis. Dr. Dennis Hill.
Thanks, Matt.